Yes. Woo.
All right. Well, welcome. So good to have you here. This is the Making Spaces podcast. I'm Sarah Heath, and this is my amazing co-host,
Josie Jimenez.
And this is a podcast about making space both literally and figuratively. So we talk to designers, creatives. We talk to people who create community. We just talk to anyone who really will talk to us, if we're honest. And today we have an amazing guest, a friend of mine, Matthew Paul Turner, who is a children's book writer. And I have to tell you, someone whose books I tear up every time I see them in Target because I love them so much. I buy them for gifts for people all the time. So if you are a family member, you've received a book from this man. He wrote a book called When I Pray for You, When God Made You. I mean, just incredible books, but he's not just a space maker for children, but really trying to work on the idea of diversity in the narrative in children's books, but also making space for just difference. And so I'm really excited to have you here.
I am
Matthew.
I'm kind of thrilled to be here. So it's awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Wow.
Oh, I love it. So we start with kind of like we lob a question towards people, and some people take it really deep, and some people take it like the question is this: are you ready?
Yeah, I guess.
Where is one of your favorite spaces and why?
Currently, because of the pandemic that we are living through, it has changed. But I live right across the street from what we call a greenway. That is a place where people run and walk and ride bikes, and I have found there are little paths that go off that greenway, and there's a little space that goes down to this river that I have spent a lot of time there of late because it's one of the few places no one else goes. It's really, really close. It's sort of a place that it's not necessarily the prettiest of all places, but it's very green and very, it's nature. And it is, it has been a really wonderful light amid this strange, weird time that we're existing in, that we're all getting used to now. But that little place down by the river that is, I could throw a baseball at it but I can't see it from my house because of the woods. But it has become a place where I have cried, I have written, I have laughed, I have all the things. So it's my escape.
Yeah, I think that's incredible to have a place to go that's in nature, but it's close. It's somewhere you can go. And I think, I don't know about you guys, but when this whole thing started, I was like, can I still walk my dog? I didn't know exactly what quarantine would look like.
Right.
What were the rules? How is this going to go? We only had the example of both stuff that was happening in Asia and also in Europe. And it felt like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be locked in my house, which I like my house, but it's not that big.
And it becomes really super small real quick if you're there.
Real quick.
It just, and you also have I also didn't know was I allowed to walk outside without a mask, if right. I was just walking around, walking down the street and, where there was really very few people that I would ever pass. But, and certainly some people, you do see some people that walk on the greenway that are wearing masks, and I have worn a mask there, but it's, but I feel like I don't have to because there's not enough people, but it's still, it's kind of become a safe place. We all really need that space now because, it's hard to be inside. I know for my kids, that's been a hard adjustment for them. And, just them getting along with their siblings. Dear Heavenly Father. Oh my soul.
I can only imagine.
So many things.
Josie has trouble getting along with her partner, and you chose him.
I know. I'm like, you're in my space right now. This whole apartment is my space, and you're in it, and I need you to.
See, this is my favorite thing about Josie. She jokes around all the time about, he's not feeding me. The agreement was, we get married, he feeds me, and he's not living up to that. But So she wants him, and if he's gone, then she misses him terribly, like terribly. But then he has only so much time that he's allowed to be present. And then she's like, get out my space.
I am an extremely social introvert, but my introversion is very extreme. A lot of people are like, oh, my partner doesn't count, you know, they're an extension of me. I was like, no, he 100% counts. I need him out of my space for me to be an introvert.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter who it is. For me, like my introvert, like it has to be alone. Like I have to be by myself to refill. And because there are moments when I'm around people and I become unable to function fully, like unable to put sentences together, or I need space and time. And then, you know, and it took me a while to not feel guilty about that. Isn't that weird how we just
Not at all, because right now in this very moment, my former assistant, who is a dear, dear friend of mine, is out on my patio with her husband. They are having coffee. I went running with him this morning, and then did a quick change to be able, I did shower, just for the record, a quick change to be able to join you guys. But Amy would come with me to events when I was speaking at events, and she would say, you've peopled enough. So actually where we met originally was the Wild Goose Festival. And I often have like several things that I'm speaking at. And Amy's come with me to simply remind me that like, you're actually not an extrovert. You're someone who can be in the world as an extrovert, but you're actually an introvert. And I start doing exactly what you're talking about, where sentences I'm not able to, and I kind of glaze over. And if you know me really well, you're like, Sarah has peopled, like she's done. I'm actually an introvert.
Yeah, and I'll even start looking past people. Like it's like I'm looking in their direction, but I'm not really looking at them. And it's you lose the ability to be present in that very moment. And you know, especially someplace at Wild Goose, because then you also have your ADHD that is like, you know, there's all the things that you can look at and all the people that are, you know, walking around, and there's just a lot to see. So.
And they're incredible people. So you don't want to miss any of it. It's almost like being at a festival kind of thing. But I think
the most amazing festival, like there have been festivals that you go to and you just don't like, you know, it's like, I'd rather not be here, but like it is a community, and it's beautiful, beautiful space. And so like, it is definitely different, but it's definitely triggers my ADHD. So.
Oh, so bad. I have ADHD too, actually. I got diagnosed like right after I had seen you guys a couple of years ago. And I remember Jamie talking about, Jamie Lynn Finch talking about who has it? Jamie?
Right.
The other Jamie.
Jamie Wright?
Jamie Wright has it.
Yeah.
And I remember just madly texting her, do you medicate? Because I don't have the typical ADHD things. Now, if you know me really well, like Josie does, when I get overwhelmed, I all of a sudden will forget that you told me like time and dates. And I almost become like obsessive around times and dates because I know my inability to keep them all tracked.
Yeah.
And then it becomes too many thoughts in my head. I don't necessarily have that hyper side, probably because I do run and all kinds of other things to sort of mitigate it. But man, I hate being at an event like that and being so worried that like, have I forgot this? Do I need to do this? And I have to make sure all of that is structured so that I can actually make space for me to be present with the people in front of me.
Right. Well, before I was medicated, I had paranoia. Like I would get, you know, during the most extreme times where I would sometimes not be able to focus, but then there would be other times where I would hyper focus on the very wrong thing. And it became like semi-obsessive, where I, you know, wanted to know like what somebody was thinking and why they were responding to me that way. Did you just look at me that way because you were upset? Did I do something? You know, that kind of stuff. And it wasn't until I started seeing my psychiatrist that I realized that all those things were connected to not being able to pay attention and not being able to be present in the moment that you wanted to be present in.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting that ADHD and OCD are often either misdiagnosed or cross-diagnosed. So I have both, I suppose, supposedly. And at some point you just start saying I'm neuroatypical, which I had a good friend, the first person to actually point out to me that they thought, Sarah, I think you're ADHD, and I was so offended because I'm a child of the 80s. So that means like the kid who has ADHD is the kid that you're like, oh, they're so annoying. They like can't focus. And I did great at school and all that kind of stuff. But to recognize that I actually can focus on more than one thing, which is abnormal in a human brain. But my OCD side is that like I can become hyper focused on the wrong thing. So, and then become quite, a little bit like too wrapped up in it. And I think in a weird way, it's created ability to make space for other people because I'm aware now, like, not everyone has the same capacity to pay attention or listen or engage with my work or whatever it might be. And that's not an offensive thing. And also like, hey, not everyone who speaks at an event can notice everybody and what they're doing and can like read a room the way that I do. Right. And that can be a gift or it can be like a big challenge.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly, I have that same gift about the whole room thing where I can read a room, I can read an individual in a room. Like I have this crazy ability to feel like what's happening, the person who really needs to be spoken to, as opposed to just, being, I know lots of people want to talk, but then there's that one person that needs to talk. Like I can kind of pick up on it. Yeah, it's
absolutely
my psychic, I guess,
Yeah, or is that like some sort of empath thing?
It's a fine line between being a person of faith and being a psychic.
Kevin Garcia would say we're all witches.
Yeah, that's exactly.
We are all just beautiful witches.
Oh, do not tell my mom that because she will blow a gasket.
I love that guy.
I love that guy too.
And they have made me feel and be more comfortable in so many areas of life. Like they challenge me, and like yeah.
They are obviously they are my people. Yeah. Every day we talk. I think almost every day Kevin and I talk. We're actually starting a podcast that will be coming out soon called Ask Your Aunties, which will be a question and answer with your two favorite aunties, your aunt who's a spiritual leader and your aunt who is a spiritual leader, which would be Kevin and I. It'll be fun.
I love that idea. That's amazing.
I wonder, I'm just thinking about both. So Josie's also a photographer. So one of the things that I know about Matthew, and I always like, if I think about you both engaging things, but then with your lens out and your camera out. And I wonder if having a camera has allowed, so both of you are Renaissance people, which we just talked to someone about what it means to be a Renaissance person, because I didn't know you wrote children's book. In my mind, I knew you had edited for magazines and that you were a speaker and then you were a photographer. I had no idea that you were the Matthew whose books I'd actually already bought one of your books before, and I had met you and then been like, wait a minute, oh, like you know how you just don't put some things together.
Well, I mean, and lots of people know my name, but don't know my face because I don't put my face in the book. I mean, it's like it is what it is. So lots of people like that, like they realize it on the when it's too late. Oh my gosh, I met that guy. Whatever.
Right. And children's books have always been a big thing. But I'm wondering, as photographers, if like the camera becomes a way of capturing that moment, if it becomes like when you're at an event or when you're taking pictures. So Josie, you have how many weddings this weekend?
Well, I have an elopement and then a big full wedding. My first couple weddings, I'm not a wedding photographer at all. I don't do weddings.
I'm actually interested to see what that's going to look like.
I've done 2 weddings, and it takes a completely different mindset for for someone to do a wedding. But when you're hungry, you'll do them or that kind of a thing. But like it's not something that I am naturally fit for. But the reason why I chose to do one of the weddings I did, it was being held at an Elvis Presley wedding chapel, and I was like, I have to do it. So it's like I felt called to do it after that. So it was just sort of, and it was just everything you thought that it was going to be. It was that, and they wanted things to be different and unique and have a special vibe to it. So it was just but I have so much respect for people who do it from a do it every weekend. And it's like, I mean, the stress, I can't handle it. So.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what it's like to have to create something every weekend, but I feel like it would be stressful. Oh, wait, that's my life. You know, Sunday is always coming and always having to be creative and having to always do that. Did you ever work in a church?
No. I mean,
No.
I just volunteer.
Wow.
I mean, but I have enough friends who have worked in churches, so I know a little bit about the volume of things that are coming at people and the stress. Like I've never met some of the most stressed out, anxious people are people who work in churches, and I mean, and I understand it because like they're, it's like getting paid for a job, but feeling like you're a little bit of a volunteer all the time. Because you're working with a board and that board's a volunteer. Like, it's just, there's a lot of drama.
Weirdest.
It's the weirdest, like there's very few jobs that are quite like it. You're called a shepherd, but you also have to be a CEO. And so like, it's just, it's a weird mindset for people to have to get in.
It's messy. So I would love to know how you got to writing children's books, and then how you've been able to add such diversity into it, and sort of where that came from, where that making space for, because I really believe some of the most profound experiences I had as a child was reading children's books. So there is, I need to look up his name. Robert Munsch, I think is his name. I still have his books, and he was a Canadian children's author. I don't know if he was in America at all, but his books are still, like, I learned some of my biggest life lessons from that. And so how did you get into this, writing books that matter in a lot of ways?
Well, I wrote books for adults. Like I wrote a couple memoirs prior to writing children's books, and wrote books that, that I would pour so much life and so much time and so much energy into, and then nobody would read them or nobody would buy them, and it would, and just like, and then sometimes I'd write books just because I needed food on the table and whatever. And so like there was just so much writing. After having kids though, I realized that there were very few books about God, or that God was anywhere in the narrative that I could read to my kids out loud, that I wasn't changing things, that I wasn't having to feel like I'm editing. And I'm like, why is this? Or that we're just so incredibly cheesy to such a degree that you're just like, oh, this is like, and it's one thing for a book about nothing, or a book about something that's hilarious, to be weird and cheesy, like you can kind of get by on that. But when it's about God, and I'm not saying that books for kids about God can't be funny or can't have a, an ironic edge to them at times. But I just found myself self-editing in my head. And the other thing is, when I did find one that I would be able to read, my kids would have much rather me read Llama Llama, or any list of other books that were available to them.
Have you heard Llama Llama read by Ludacris? Because that will change your life.
Oh, I might have to go do that now.
It's the best ever.
Like our family loves llamas now because of those books, because they've been the one staple that all of my kids have really gotten involved in and like really, really loved throughout their childhood. But anyway, so I one of the very first types of writing I did as a teenager, like I was the kid who carried around a spiral notebook all the time, that wrote down poetry and wrote down rhymes that I would turn into songs in my head, or I would rewrite. And I was raised.
Kibsey's shaking her head. You can't, like, people who are listening only cannot see, not on the YouTube channel. She's just like, because that's her.
Yeah,
Still.
I rewrote. I mean, I was raised in a very, very strict conservative faith-based home, and so I would rewrite songs that were, you know, meant to be about sex and drugs and alcohol, and I'd rewrite them to be about Jesus. You know,
Which is not that hard to do because a lot of the worship songs are super
right,
creepy.
right. So true. And so it was, rhyming was something that I loved to do. And so after having kids, I set aside time and space, um, outside of my normal work to dream up, if I was going to write a book about God for my kids, what would that look like? And how would I, you know, and I wrote some terrible, you know, poetry, at first. And I eventually landed on this concept of God making light. And I just started to envision, if God made light, what would it look like in that first moment? And because there are so many layers to the concept from a scripture standpoint of light, of us being light, and light being inside of us, and that, you know, God being a light, like there's lots of ways. And so I weaved this book called When God Made Light. And I loved loved what I'd written. I finally got to a place and I sent it out to people and they gave me a few edits, but they, like, everyone I sent it to, they really loved it. And so I sent it to my agent, who was not a children's book agent. Like, he has really, it was a brand new area for him. And I didn't think that he was going to do it. Like, I honestly thought that he was going to say no to me right off. And he said, Matthew, this is really good. Let's go for it. I got 11 no's from every publisher he sent it out to. Like, I mean, like, some of them came back fast. Some of them came back and said no because it was me who had written it. Because I was known at that time as the blogger, Jesus Needs a New PR. and so I had developed a reputation for causing trouble. Because I didn't have a church, or I didn't have like a board that I was reporting to, I could say things and get away with it. You know, it's kind of like me and Rachel and I came up in that same, Rachel Held Evans and I came up in that same world where we didn't have churches just connected to our stories. And so we could get away with saying and challenging culture in a way that lots of other people couldn't. And so we did. And I got in trouble for it. And you know, I definitely had moments where it was, where it got me in trouble. And so I got some no's because of that. Anyway, I ended up self-publishing the book, and we sold almost all 5,000 copies that we, you know, had printed. And for a children's book, that was a big deal. And so Random House, the editor that I worked with at Random House, in their faith division, they came back to me and said, hey, we'd like to consider publishing this now. And so that's how I got into it. And in the meantime, I had started writing When God Made You. That was the first book that I released in a wide, you know, to you know, through a publisher. And then When God Made Light became the second book.
I think that's an important part of the story to not glaze over, is that you had to self-publish your first book, and that you had to believe in it enough to say, I've gotten 11 no's.
Yeah.
But there's something about this that matters. I think so often we hit that, like,
a whole bunch of money. I mean, because it's for color. It's like, you know, you have to hire a illustrator, because I don't have that gift. And so, like, it was a expensive risk. And it, you know, it paid off, but certainly it was, yeah, I did. I had to believe in something, but there was something about it. Like, you know how when you write something and it moves you, and then there's a moment in it where it's like, it becomes its own thing that affects you as much as, like, you almost become separate from it. Like, there are moments when your art, or when you can look at it and you can almost that you're not so close to it, especially as time goes on. Like there are moments where I'm still sort of like, I see When God Made You, and it doesn't immediately connect that it's my book. And I know that's weird, and that probably doesn't make
No,
sense.
that totally
Like,
makes sense to anyone who is a creative, which is most of our listeners.
It has taken on a life of its own. That is, yes, my name is on it, and I know that it's my book, but it is, there are, I don't use this idea lightly. I don't use the concept of, that maybe that was something inspired by something bigger than me. Like that it's taken on its own thing, and I can look at it and I can still be moved by it, because I believed in it, and it's really good. And it's not like, there are some rhymes in it. I go back and even the weird ones that I'm like, I wish I would. I don't even like. I embrace them because it has taken on. It has. I've gotten more letters. The one thing about children's book that has, and you bring it up, where you still have this like beautiful connection to the books that you read as a child. Like, what I didn't know about children's books is where they would end up. Like, I have gotten letters from ministers who, a minister in New Hampshire sent me a letter and said, I have spent the last 3 or 4 weeks working as a volunteer for hospice and helping this 100-year-old lady enter the next space. And one of her requests every time I was there was for me to read your book, When God Made You. And I didn't write that book or those words for that kind of scenario. Like, the idea that my words would help somebody enter into eternity or whatever, or pass on. That was not even my intention. But that's the beautiful thing about children's literature, is that it goes into places and it can create dialogue, for adults or for parents or for people, going through difficult experiences, as much as it can for children. In some cases, more so, I think, because I think that there are moments in each of my books that are written more for the adult or the parent or the person reading it than they are for the child. I think they will become moments that mean something for the child, but the child's not going to fully understand it,
Nope.
because it's a big concept. God is a big, big concept. And so when, you're writing this idea, so be you, fully you, a show-stopping review. Live your life in full color, every tint, every hue. Discover, explore, have faith, but love more, and learn and relearn all that God made you for. The adult in that situation, or the person reading it, is going to understand what that means and the beauty of that, because life teaches us that lesson. And
right, relearn
right.
is something that all of a sudden I'm imagining a parent reading this who's experienced deconstruction in their faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they read that word, I get to relearn. I don't have to stick with what I've been given. That so often I think, those words, faith like a child, I think sometimes we think that means it's blind faith, right? Kids just believe everything you tell them. That's not true. But kids do have this ability to take the big and make it simple, and then sit with that for a little while. And simple doesn't mean, I don't know, simple can just mean sort of getting back to the bare facts. I mean, the idea of like, you're loved by God, you can say that. What does that mean? Like, it's actually our saying for our church is, you are like, we exist to remind you that you're loved by God. It's a returning to the thing that already is true.
And I think that so often children's books, especially those that are in the faith world, they they're so busy trying to shape this moral lesson or this idea
Right.
into these points. And this is what you need to take. This is the lesson. Oh, I'm going to tell you this really cool story, but let me tell you, I'm going to also define that story for you and not let it speak for itself. So I think that my hope is that while there are moments in my book that might feel like a teachable time or a teachable sentence, my hope is that the words and the illustrations create an opportunity for that kid to feel, and that those words would sink in, that those parents would, that, you know, it's the idea of being the repetition of words. Like, I see myself as I write liturgy for kids,
I love that.
and that parents get, like, you know, that people who have little ones in their lives, that, you know, that, I mean, I have lots of people who are, you know, foster parents that read these words to their kids. And so, like, I never thought that I would find so much, like, joy in and so much creative energy in this space, but I do. And so it is a beautiful thing for me to just be able to sit and imagine what I'm going to write next and think about it. This isn't completely public yet, but it's sort of public. It's semi-public, but I mentioned my friend Rachel Held Evans, and, you know, she passed away in 2019, and
Gosh, has it been since 2000? Was it only 2000? I mean, I just saw Dan a couple weeks ago, and it's hard.
Yeah, right.
It feels sometimes like it was yesterday, and many times in my life
it feels like it's 10 years. Like, it just, you know, and she was a force that the world, like, there's not going to be another race, you know how, like, and I know that people use that, like, she came along at a time that was perfect for her thing.
Yeah.
And what I love, like, anyone who knew her, the one thing that I've realized over and over again is how many of us can go back into our emails and find a note from Rachel that that was sent to us at very particular times when we needed to hear from her. Like, and her funeral is still, like, it was one of the most diverse, beautiful groups of people that I have ever been a part of. And so I bring that up because in this journey of writing children's books, one of the things that the last thing that Rachel put together was the last idea she sent to her agent was an idea for a children's book.
I actually knew that. I was hoping you'd say something about it.
And I was asked to write that, finish it, and it was, you know, I during that whole time I was going through some of the most difficult time in my life personally, and so much of my life felt so out of control, and then I had this gift of writing this idea, and the book is called What Is God Like, and it comes out in May, and it is this beautiful message that I swear there were moments, and I told Dan this, I was like, there's moments when I swear I felt like I was channeling her. Like, I mean, where it was this, what a gift to take somebody whose ideas, who was a friend, but also somebody I deeply respected. Somebody, you know, whose writing had affected me, and to take on that story of continuing something that she was writing, and bring and and hopefully do it justice. And it was a beautiful, hopeful thing. But like, even writing her idea, I saw it as writing writing liturgy for children, writing ideas about big things, about healing and hope and God.
This is one of the things that like kind of gets to me a little bit about both of you grew up in conservative settings, and in a lot of those conservative settings, women aren't allowed to lead or teach, but they are allowed to lead and teach children, which I think is your most influential thing to be able to do. It's always shocking. Like one time I had a very reverse situation where my boyfriend was a children's pastor, and we were at two different churches. I wasn't taking advantage of him as a lead pastor. But it was always sort of funny when people would be like, in this relationship, guess which one of them is a children's pastor? People would always guess me, right? Yeah. Tiny little girl versus big tall dude. But his thing was like, if I'm going to influence the world, I'm going to start with the little peeps. Again, because it's a liturgy, it's a way of being. And I think about, you said foster children read your book, and that just hit me incredibly how much, as a foster parent, one of my best friends just became a foster parent 3 weeks ago. And journeying with her in that, she's a social worker. And so she really kind of thought she knew what it would be like to be a foster parent. And then it blows your whole world open, because she's always thought, I don't have time for a child, so this is a great way I want a child kind of thing. And now she's absolutely bonded to this child, but she realizes she doesn't know the length of time this child will be in her life. It might be forever. It might be one more week. It might be this kid is in the system. So the idea that she could impart something. So liturgy is the work of the people. It forms us. It's not just like words that we say again and again. It becomes a part of us.
And it should transcend various ideas, various people groups, various like situations. And so there's some very intentional things that I try to do, that I avoid any language that involves birth or the day you were born, or that, because that doesn't translate to some people who have either adopted children or who have, are foster parents or whatever. And so, and I avoid pronouns for God, and I avoid because I don't want, there are some children who have had really bad experiences with a father figure or a mother figure. And God is already a complicated enough concept for a child to understand. Why complicate it with ideas that, people were like, but what about Jesus? Well, technically Jesus saw God as the Father, as his Father. And so I don't think that's a reason why we all should do that. And so, anyway, and then with Rachel's books, I do use, it'll be the first book that I use pronouns for God, but I use all of them. And so I use he, she, and they, and it's and it's so different from what I'm used to write. It's not rhyme. I don't rhyme anything. It's just words and ideas, and it is
I can't wait. It's just really exciting to think about. But I continuously think about how so many of my friends, and so many of you, Josie included, are rebels, right? But in a way that is just sort of good trouble. As we sit and talk today, we're still waiting for the election results. There's this brah in a lot of us, and however you feel. I have a feeling we don't have very many Trump supporters that listen to us, but
hope not.
Probably.
Because Josie would find them. Just kidding. She would not. You have conservative friends. But there is this how can we be revolutionary in ways that might not? How can we make space for this profound newness and difference. So like, I always joke around, like, our community is LGBTQIA, completely inclusive and affirming. And people are like, well, do you have that on a sign? And I was like, no, we just have like a sign that says you're already loved by God. And it happened to have like a rainbow in the back. But that was like, you're already loved by God with a rainbow suggested to folks in the community, like, I don't need you to be anything different. But it wasn't like a middle finger to people who that isn't their story, or like, it's how can we make space for other people is often subtle, or like a book that you may not even notice that the pronouns are, it's this beautiful way of liturgy. I mean, I don't even know how to say it any better than that.
How can I welcome people to the table without pointing out that I am welcoming you to the table because I think that you have been this, or you have gone through this, or what?
Right.
I want my books, certainly my books are in the households of people who would think and feel much more conservatively than I ever would imagine. But I also have people who read them to their transgender children, and it's the only book about God that they read to their kids, and that's more precious.
Oh, that's huge.
Like, and that is a gift that that's incredible. And then I've had, women in their 50s with no children and at all read it or use one of my books as their only spiritual information that they engage during cancer treatment. So for every single day that she had, chemotherapy, she would read When God Made You before she went to bed. And so like that's that. I'm like, I didn't write that book for that, but man, like it's beautiful to see how words of hope, words of good words about God can transcend to so many spaces. So
yeah, and spaces you didn't anticipate.
Yeah, and that's art. I think that's the beauty of art, where it can sort of transcend what's the intention, or the when you sit down to write something, your why becomes irrelevant in some cases, because it takes on a different why for somebody else.
And only when you engage your why fully, when you're not overly considering. I think one thing we've noticed with all the different people that we've interviewed, I mean, we've interviewed from like a choreographer to just, you cannot imagine, her friend who's this huge mural creator. I always like to ask the question, like, who are you thinking about when you write it? And often it's like, I'm not actually, or the audience that I'm thinking of isn't necessarily, it's always like one person. Morgan Harper Nichols, who's a friend of mine, she's like a spoken word artist. Funnily enough, I met Rachel and Morgan on the same, the three of us were the keynotes. Well, Rachel and I were the keynotes for this event, and Morgan at the time was primarily a musician. So she was a musician at this thing.
Yeah.
And then the three of us hung out in the dressing room and became friends and years ago. But Morgan said, like, I always think of like one person. And then we also had this other Ariel, who is model spoken word person. She's amazing. And Ariel said the same thing. I think of like the one person, and then you don't realize the one person's actually for them. Millions of people follow them. And
I bet there are times, though, one thing that I've learned about my own story is that I often find myself writing to me as a kid.
Yes, that's what she said. Sometimes it's this thing.
It's that kid in you, the kid that's been hurt, the kid that has seen it all, the kid that has felt it all, the kid that believed with all his heart, all of that. And so I probably, in the very beginning of writing children's books, I probably would have told you that I wrote for my kid. And there's certainly a part of that would be true. Like, I think that because I'm building on this idea of being a dad and this beautiful soul that I get to watch and like live and watch their story and be sit in the front row for it. And but the more therapy that I I have walked through, the more I realized that I was writing for that kid in me, and that kid in me can relate to so many kids, the other kids that are in other people.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that is something that I've come to terms with also in therapy. Shout out to therapy.
Yes.
Yes, if BetterHelp wants to sponsor us, we'd be great for that. Go for
Mhm.
it.
I've found that all aspects of art that I do are not necessarily even for me as who I was as a child, because I recognize that I had the incredible privilege of having an Enneagram 8 personality, you know. Nobody can
She
come at
fierce.
me. But I do all these things, and like I write and I do photography and I do everything I do is for little Josie if I warrant an Enneagram 8. If I was shy, if I was demure, if I didn't have the capacity to advocate for myself. And I feel like sometimes we often as creatives forget that they're just people that are so different than us. And I mean, you do that so well with your books. Like, you don't use pronouns, you use no birthing references. And I think that's how we will transform the world. And starting with kids is so transformative. Because like you said, there's not a lot of books like the ones that you write. And I was a kid who devoured every single book in my way, to the point where I read chapter books way too early as a kid, because there just wasn't enough. And I think adding to that is very respectable. Matthew Paul Turner.
I think about growing up with a kid with parents who were so busy. My parents are amazing, amazing people. But my dad was a physician, my mom a nurse. But the thing I remember is them reading books to me. And I remember they would use voices. And I know that sounds ridiculous to think, but my mom isn't necessarily silly. She's British, she's funny, but she's not always silly unless she's with kids. And it's funny because she's done a lot of work. So she was a nurse, but she integrated special needs kids into the classroom. So in Canada, where I grew up until I was 14, that's like a thing, is trying to have kids kind of have both for the kids who are mainstreamed and for the kids who are not mainstream, to have this experience of having other special needs in a space, so they learn how to that's not weird or different, and they don't have their own classroom. We're all together. So my mom integrated special needs kids into classrooms. And so my mom reading, and I love when she reads to kids, because there's this other side of my mom that has these voices, and it's like a different getting to see that side of my mom, or my dad reading books to me when he was so busy. I think those are those moments or where people feel loved in a way. Like, I love books as a way of connecting and saying the thing that you may not have words for, right? So
Totally. Do you know
that's
the
what
one
art.
thing I loved about my mom reading is that it was one of the few times where sitting in her lap gave me her point of view.
Oh,
And so we shared, like, I felt loved, and I was seeing what she was seeing. Like, there is this, so I, like, when I picture those moments, I picture it's hard for me to even picture sitting next to my mom. I was in her lap. We were in a rocking chair, and I was seeing what she was seeing. And there were, it's sort of like our something aligned, and you felt like you were one person for a little bit. I don't know that I mean, it's like, but that's that there. I always visualize.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And I think that's the artist's way, is to like figure out, how can I put the thing out that's inside of me, recognizing that it's the thing that's inside of me, but maybe it's a gift that I've been meant to give the world. And maybe it is that I'm to write the memoir, but maybe it is that I'm to get as simple and small as a child's book, or I'm to get as Bold is a big mural, but all of them have that same sort of helping other people have different lenses and maybe discover that that was their lens in the first place. I laugh because I'm looking at my bookshelf, which has I have this bookshelf that's like friends. So all the friends that I have that are authors, there's a lot of you guys really break me because even when people send me their advanced copy, I still buy their book, because I think I like to see that. So I have so many books here, but the only other book that's on this shelf is a children's book from when I was little that I've had since I was tiny.
Yeah.
Because I don't know the author, but they were my friend. And as a kid, that book is called Mortimer Be Quiet, which is one of my favorite books. And again, my brother used to read it to me because he thought I was loud. So he would read it to me and yell, "Sarah, be quiet." It was like his favorite part of the whole book. Thank you so much, Paul, for sharing a little bit of your story. It sounds like someone is blending something in your home.
Oh, that's me. Hold on one second. I'll be back.
One of the ways that we like to end the show is to ask the question, if people can make space either for themselves or other, what's one tangible way that they could do that? I know it's a big question.
Find something that is find something practical that gives you life, and I'll explain. I am ADHD. I am all over the place. My life is feels messy sometimes, and it feels unresolved or unkept at times. But the moments when I am baking and I'm following a specific menu, there is peace in the idea of me following this line of things. And if I do all those things correctly, there's a good chance that I'm going to create something that is yummy or something that my kids are going to love. And so for me, baking has become this center point or this centering thing that I have gone to over and over and over again, because because everything else can be chaotic, but I can have this little moment in my kitchen for 45 minutes and I can put together this thing and I can follow this process and I can do it in a way. And if I do it in a way, I'm going to get not instant, but almost instant gratification in some capacity. And so I think that it is, which I never would have thought that going against my personality would bring me something so helpful and peaceful. So in my most stressful times, I go to the kitchen and I look for ingredients and things that I can put together and maybe bake something.
It sounds meditative.
Yeah. I know that probably isn't your common answer, but it is something for me that is, it's kind of like, for me, there is something beautiful about this scientific idea that if I do all this, I'm going to get this. That's part of it. But it's also just this process, and following the process. And it centers me. So
I love that. Making space for yourself by creating something for you. It's baking. I definitely redo furniture with that because there's a beginning and an end. And I think so much of our life and our work is vague and big and big blobs. And so to have like a project, Josie during quarantine and while we've been waiting for the elections, it's so fun to follow her Etsy Instagram, because I'm like, this woman is putting out jewelry like it is going to solve all the problems of the world, because it's a thing she can beginning and end.
It solves all the problems in my head.
The other thing that I do is I carve
I did not know this about you.
Cottonwood bark. So this used to be the bark on a tree in British Columbia, Canada. And so you can kind of see it's dug out in the back. And so I found this medium on the internet many years ago, and it's very easy wood to carve. And so I make all these little houses and things out of it. And it's one of those, it's funny because it's like, they're really like, there's a lot of people that would never want this put in their house, and I could care less. Like I love these little things. I love creating these little like windows, and I don't know. So this is sort of something else that I do.
I love that. I did not know that about you at all.
Yeah.
That's so cool. You whittle. You essentially whittle.
I whittle. And it's so, I whittle cottonwood bark, which is an odd
as
thing.
one does. I love these.
Yeah. I mean, it's only a habit that like 75-year-old men do. But if I go online and I find all the people that are doing it, it's always somebody who is very, very old. And I don't know. Yeah. It's something where I can be in a room and be doing something, but also be present and not.
Yep. I always tell people to find a little hobby you can do while watching Netflix. Like I crochet all of my pillow covers, and I make jewelry. It's especially during COVID. I think it's really important to have a little something to do with your fingies.
Absolutely. And you get to learn and create this stuff that just, even if it's not as pretty as somebody else might think it doesn't matter. Like you've made this. Like I've made things now. Like I've also carved walking sticks for my kids, and I'm working on my third one. And so like, but these are things that like maybe my kids will have long after I'm gone. I mean, because is it because it's the prettiest thing? No, it's because Dad made it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I think that is wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing time with us. Thank you for what you're putting out. I'm really excited. All the Colors of Christmas is coming out, or is out.
It is out.
It's
anywhere.
Great book to have there will be a copy being read at our church for sure. Such a joy to have that. How can we get people to find you? They can find you in Target, which I just think, to me, that's the end of fame right there.
I literally found like, all the Colors of Christmas just got put on Target bookshelves this week, and so like it's there. You can find me at Amazon or at Barnes & Noble, or at go support your local bookstore. You might have to order it because not all of them have it in stock, but I know that many of them are struggling right now, and so they could really use that support. So
we share the Evans family as friends, and I was recently, Dan helped me in the Airstream, getting my Airstream. It's a long story. It was on his property. Poor man. I raised the property value of his new home by taking my Airstream off of it. But in that tiny town, my nephew came to see me, and in that tiny town was a bookstore for kids that my nephew went crazy in because he loves books. As a 8-year-old, he loves books. And so found the coolest books there. And so I know they'll have it there. So find it at your little tiny bookstore if you can. And if you want to find more about Matthew himself, MatthewPaulTurner.com. Follow him on Instagram. Just an incredible human, great friend. Try to make him your friend. DM him. I'm just kidding. Great human. It has been wonderful to be together. I'm Rev Sarah Heath on all the social media. How can they find you, Josie?
I am Josie Takes the World on Instagram and Josie Takes the on Twitter.
That's true. And friends, you can also leave us a voicemail at www.anchor.fm/making spaces. That's the first time I've done that all by myself. We're working on some really exciting merch. I'm so over the moon. We've got some t-shirts coming out. We've got a pen that also is like a screwdriver. We've got great stuff coming out. So we'll tell you more about that later. Other than that, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week when we'll be
saving a space for you.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.
I'm going to hit stop record. Hold the phone.